All right, y'all, welcome back to the Commodore Arms channel. Okay, so today we are checking out the RTS Tactical Mini Shield. Now, I'm pretty excited to get my hands on this shield because one, it's a ballistic shield, and that's always just kind of cool to see like modern day warfighters with a freaking ballistic shield, with like a shield, like some old school Spartan stuff. But at the same time, this thing is rated for rifle rounds, which is pretty freaking impressive. So before we go into anything, I'll explain kind of my background with ballistic shields. So when I was in the Marine Corps, you can kind of see the t-shirt here already. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was on the RTT, which is a recapture tactics team. Now for that, you have to go through the close quarter battle school, which is a 7-week course. Now, I got some pretty good experience working with ballistic shields in that course because for whatever reason, I always got stuck with it. But I gotta say, working with ballistic shields is a bit of an art and also just a bit of a struggle in general because they're not fun and you kind of need to understand how to use it without being a liability to the rest of your team. Now in the Army, we also trained with shields, and that was more in the subterranean aspects, so kind of like tunnel warfare, because shields are very, very helpful when it comes to an environment like that. Now in general, shields, you can imagine, are mostly used when it comes to close quarter battle, and of course some of those confined spaces where you don't really have a whole lot of cover, like tunnels where you don't have a whole lot of cover afforded to you and you need to make movement inside that area. And of course, it's nice to have some ballistic protection while you're making that movement, especially if you're moving with a stack, so you can provide some protection to you and the rest of the operators behind you. Now, this thing is rated for rifle rounds, which is a bit of a game changer as far as like the ability to use this thing in a few different environments. Now, the shields that we had in the Marine Corps and the Army, at least the ones that I used, were only rated for pistol rounds, which is kind of a bit disconcerting, especially when you're in a stack and you know this thing is really heavy and you have to kind of like move with it or else. But you also kind of just hope the bad guy only has a pistol, because if they have a rifle, hopefully they're like inaccurate, because if they were hitting our shield, we were not going to be having a good time. So for something that's rated for rifle rounds, it's pretty sweet, and I feel a little bit more comfortable actually, you know, bringing this thing into a shoot house. Sometimes I'd be like, you know, it's only rated for pistol rounds, and I'm pretty sure these guys have rifles. So I'm probably gonna leave this thing behind. At least I wanted to. But yeah, it's pretty freaking sweet. So this is a level 3+ protection. So basically it'll stop rifle rounds up to like special threats. Now this will stop your 5.56 green tip, which is pretty impressive because that was like our standard round we used in the Marine Corps because it was a little bit better at penetrating. So it'll stop that 5.56 green tip. It'll stop the 7.62 NATO round. It'll also stop the 7.62 by 39 steel core rounds. So like your kind of like your standard Russian AK ammo. It'll stop those, which is, again, very comforting if I have to bring this thing into a certain environment. And something else that wasn't really afforded to me before with the other shields that I've used is like how many rounds this thing can actually take. I'm sure this thing could take a bunch of rounds and it'll still be good. So that's kind of like one of the pros of having a steel shield. And at the same time, it is steel, so you can knock this thing all around. You could smash it into the walls. You could probably breach with it too, to be honest. But yeah, it's steel. It's very tough. You can treat it very harshly, and yeah, it's gonna survive that. I mean, it's meant to stop bullets, so yeah, you can treat this thing pretty hard, which is nice. You know, you shouldn't have to coddle your gear, especially gear like this. Now, as far as the actual weight and size, so as far as the weight for this one, this is their medium size. They have 3 sizes. The medium is 14 inches wide and 24 inches tall. But also, like, look how like narrow that thing is, or skinny. I don't know. I don't know, it sounds better. We'll go with thin. Yeah, it's pretty freaking thin. But yeah, that's pretty freaking impressive. Now, as far as the weight, it is just shy of 17 pounds. So hopefully you have like some forearm/bicep gains because yeah, if you're moving with this, again, you'll sort of grow into a love-hate relationship with this thing. You'll get really good and really comfortable with it to the point where you kind of forget that it's actually, you know, just shy of 17 pounds. But at first, it's gonna be some growing pains for sure, especially if, you know, you don't hit the gym too much. You might be struggling with it a little bit. However, there are some ways, and I'll kind of go over some techniques a little bit later as how to kind of implement this without, again, being a liability for yourself or other people around you who are kind of relying on this for protection. But yeah, it's just shy of 17 pounds, so a little heavy, but for something that's, again, this size, 24 inches, that's like 2 feet of protection, which is pretty freaking solid. And again, something that I can still move around pretty easily. You guys might have noticed I've made some cuts in this video, and I've been holding this shield probably for like 30 minutes now, and I'm not getting too fatigued yet because, again, I'm kind of doing one of those techniques that I'll kind of go over a little bit later. But yeah, a ballistic shield is a fantastic thing, but you definitely need to understand how to implement this thing. Now, as far as some of the things they add to make it a little bit easier to actually facilitate the use of this, you have, of course, your handle to actually carry this thing, but then you have a strap. This is kind of like a bungee strap that you can use, which provides some extra support, because you can imagine if you don't have that and you're trying to do like movements like this, like you normally would with the ballistic shield, it's going to be all on that bicep, that wrist, that forearm, as opposed to you being able to kind of leverage some of your bone and muscle supports to really move that thing around and kind of have it just move normally with your arm, as opposed to you kind of muscling it as much. So they do have that, and of course they have a trauma pad, which is a pretty good thinking, because yeah, this thing might be able to stop multiple rifle rounds, but I don't want stress fractures in my actual forearm there. So yeah, that's definitely appreciated, and it's a little bit oversized too. So even if it's not like necessarily a direct hit over your forearm, it'll stop a lot of that pressure, that overpressure from coming and going right into your arm, which is yeah, definitely appreciated. Now the shield itself does have a polyurea coating, but it's not necessarily meant for like spall protection or anything. It's kind of just meant for overall durability. And of course you're gonna be using this thing pretty heavily, so it's nice to have some sort of coating on it to kind of help with that durability. Now, as far as things that I've identified compared to other shields, of course, you'll have a bunch of different ballistic shields out there. You have like, well, of course, different sizes. You have like some pretty small ones. I've seen like ones probably like half the size of this, all the way to ones that'll literally be like head to toe protection, ones that actually have like wheels and stuff on them. Now, aside from the size, some other things you'll see is sometimes you'll have a window, sometimes you'll have a light, which are always like pretty handy, especially in CQB environments when things get, kind of dark. But you could probably mount a light to this somehow. It'd be cool actually if that was like an aftermarket accessory, because I know it's got these bolts here. So if you could maybe like install a light through one of those fixtures, that would be pretty freaking cool. RTS, if you want to consider that, maybe that'd be kind of dope. But yeah, the window is nice to have. I will say that. It's a little bit more comfortable. Again, then you also need to consider like how heavy the ballistic glass is and what the glass itself is rated for. But the window itself just offers you the opportunity to see the threat without exposing any of your head, because at this point for a shield like this, you're more of using it as a barricade as opposed to kind of like overall head protection. So you're still kind of using it as cover. So you're gonna need to expose your head a little bit to be able to actually see. Unless you have something like a laser or you're kind of aiming with a flashlight, you can do that as well. But again, you're still going to need to like look a little bit past it, because yeah, the thing's not transparent, obviously. So of course that'll influence how you actually use the shield with those specific weapon systems. Now, some things that I noticed, something that I didn't have with other ballistic shields is, again, you do have these bolts. So as far as how that might be a concern, I guess if the off chance somebody does hit that maybe enough times, it could potentially crack it to the point where the handle might come off, which would not be ideal. I don't know. I don't think that those themselves are really ballistic or bulletproof. But yeah, that is just something to think about at least. But yeah, I've used a few different shields, and yeah, you kind of have to understand how that shield works for you, because the weight is going to decide how you use it. If it has a window, how big it is, because it also decides how you can actually support the shield itself when you're not just doing this, because you're not going to be doing this all day. You're going to do this for maybe like a few minutes, and then you're going to get smoked, and you're going to go back to doing something like this. And of course, it's a little bit easier to do it when the shield is like this size, but when it's a little bit bigger, it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of brutal. But yeah, that's kind of awakening some old traumas I had with the ballistic shields. But from what I can see, the build quality of this thing is pretty freaking solid. Like, the handle is very solid, the trauma pad, It's comfortable, and it's also got some mesh. Now that mesh is definitely appreciated because, yeah, when you're sweating, you don't want that trauma pad to be absorbing all of that nasty sweat and also getting slick to the point where it's like sliding around and making weird noises. But it's also mesh, so it adds a little bit of ventilation, which when you're using a ballistic shield, any ventilation is definitely appreciated. The strap itself, I can take it or leave it. Again, you do have the option to kind of change it out if you want to. And I've seen a few different kind of variations of what this would look like. But as far as using a bungee, makes it a little bit easier to actually get it on, which if you're talking about maybe like a home defense situation or, you know, God forbid, like an active shooter situation, and you want to get this thing on pretty quickly, the bungee is pretty helpful because it allows you to kind of get it on and it's already still pretty taut to the point where it's not like moving around too much. So I don't know, it's kind of growing on me. I haven't used a bungee specifically for this specific support, but I gotta say it works pretty well. Now you do have a clip here. I mean, it seems like it's pretty standard quality. I'm not sure exactly what the plastic is, maybe like ABS plastic, but it doesn't look like too bad. I don't think it's really gonna break unless I do something pretty crazy with it or yank it maybe like really hard. But again, you do have the potential of swapping it out since you do have those bolts. So I guess it wouldn't be the end of the world, but I'm not too worried about them breaking. I think it's pretty solid quality. I would like maybe, the bungee I do like, but maybe if it was a little bit flatter, had a little bit more surface area, so it's not necessarily like pinching as much or creating as much pressure in just like one kind of linear area. Generally like the wider straps feel a little bit better, and they also provide a little bit more control because they tend to not move up and down too much. So yeah, I don't know. There's a few options out there, I guess, if you do want to change it out. But I think overall this works pretty well. I've used it in the house a little bit more than the wifey probably wants me to. But yeah, it's been pretty comfortable. I haven't really felt any sort of discomfort in this area. It's mostly just in the bicep because, again, this thing is just shy of 17 pounds. And I'm going to keep using that because I think it's officially like 16.9. So saying that sounds a little bit better than 17 pounds. Now I have some clips sort of pre-recorded, but when you're actually using a shield like this, again, you're gonna be using it kind of as a barricade. Now you do have these nice little slots right here, which are great. So you can utilize that for certain situations, especially in really sort of confined situations, especially like maybe a closet or something where, you know, you can basically point the gun and you're guaranteed to hit like a pretty small area. So at that point, if you're really going to a confined space like that, by all means, definitely feel free to use this because you don't need to see or aim too much. So at that point, you can just get a little bit of a view and you can probably positively identify that it is an actual threat. So you don't need to see as much or have as much situational awareness on that smaller space. So you can definitely feel free to utilize that and kind of, yep, you're definitely a bad guy. I'm gonna go ahead and start lighting some rounds into you. So it is nice. You can use it also for certain like sub guns. I was using it for my MP5 and my P90, and there were some positions where it was kind of working out pretty well. But generally speaking, how I would use it, because again, this thing is just shy of 17 pounds. So it's gonna start getting pretty freaking rough if you're just doing this the whole time. A lot of people, you kind of see them using a shield like this, which is totally viable. But at this point, you're not really supporting the shield except for with this arm. So you can try and do this and you'll probably get like the best sort of sight and accuracy when you're doing this. But at the same time, you're gonna get fatigued super quickly. And then this thing is going to make you a liability. The shield itself is gonna be a liability because it's gonna kind of, yeah, break you off to the point where you're about to pass out, become like a heat casualty, sweating, holding this thing up for like 5 minutes even. So for me, generally speaking, I would support the shield a little bit with this hand. So I'll have a little bit of a cant and then I'll kind of have my hand up sort of pressed against the shield to provide a little bit of that kind of lateral support, I guess. And that will really, really help you to the point where I can still use my sights. I'm also stabilizing it pretty well since it is up against the shield. So as I start recoiling, I'll be still pretty good to actually take some follow-on shots. So that's generally how you'll see me using a shield like this. Of course, if you have the window, you can kind of punch it out in front of that glass. But again, since we don't really have that, we're kind of still forced to look around it. And if I'm looking around it like this, that is a possibility, especially if I'm kind of supporting it. I can do that a little bit more prolonged. But again, you can imagine my field of view is not very good, especially since I have my gun right in front of my eyes. And then this left eye is basically useless as well. Yeah, my situational awareness is not going to be great. So this is good for certain circumstances, especially again, when we're a little bit closer and you don't necessarily need to have as much of a field of view. And of course, you don't necessarily need to have more like accurate shots, you know, kind of like focusing on your actual sights as well. That is definitely an option you can use. Now, of course, with CQB, there's not just going to be, you know, corners that you like. There's going to be corners that you don't like. So if I'm kind of going around this way, with a shield like this, it's not really feasible to just kind of switch arms, especially it's going to be kind of awkward. In the Marine Corps, we used to have our pistol attached on a sling with like a little bungee sling. It was attached to the handle itself, so we could just drop that pistol. We had another pistol on standby, and that also made it a little bit easier to kind of switch arms. But for something like this, and again, in the scenarios, you're probably gonna use this for like home defense or sort of active shooter kind of scenarios. You're probably not going to be switching it, or you're not gonna wanna switch it so much, especially if you're not proficient with your non-firing hand or your non-dominant hand. It's gonna make it a little bit awkward. So there are some ways to handle it. Of course, if you're coming around a corner like this, generally for me, the most comfortable is if I'm coming around a corner, I'll cant this a bit. I'll have my pistol in front, and then I'll kind of lean out like this. So I can still see my sights. I have kind of like one eye situational awareness, one eye field of view. But again, I'm kind of poking around that corner and I can still use my sights. And at this point, I'm pretty much just trying to protect my shoulder and of course my head when I'm actually getting out of that side, because yeah, it is going to be awkward trying to use your right hand. With pistols, generally speaking, it'll be fine if you don't have a shield. It's fine to kind of still use that and not switch your hand to go around the opposite cover. But when you're talking about a shield, sometimes you'll have to do this, which isn't too bad, especially if you're not doing it for too long. Now, there are a lot of people who have developed their own specific tactics for using shields, and they're pretty freaking impressive. I gotta say, there's a lot of like ingenuity when it comes to that stuff. But really, you have to find what's comfortable for you and what's feasible based off of your fitness level, but also your height, the size of the shield, what the shield actually allows for you to do based off of having a window, the shape itself. So there's a lot of considerations. You really kind of just have to find what's comfortable and what works to actually provide you some protection, but also allow you to be somewhat effective with the weapon you're trying to use. Because again, we have a defensive tool, but we're still working offensively. Now, another point that kind of runs tandem to that is being able to use this thing in a hallway and not getting super like broke off, like using this the whole time and kind of maintaining long security like this, because yeah, it's ideal for your stack, and sometimes you will have to do this if you have people behind you. You're going to want to keep that, you know, protecting generally where their vital organs and their head would be. But you know, if you're kind of working by yourself, if you do need to kind of take a break in a hallway before you move to the next room, you can kind of drop it here. Do this as far as like keep your eyes above the shield so you can maintain some situational awareness. You can drop it, but of course, if you drop it to one side, your field of view, it's basically like putting blinders on. Right now, I can't see anything to the left side of the hallway. And if I do this, I can't see anything to the right side of the hallway. So you can kind of just drop your head a little bit lower to, again, maintain that field of view, that situational awareness of all the different danger areas that's in front of you. And then at this point, you don't necessarily need to be doing this because, you know, you're not really protecting yourself anyway. You can do this. You can even throw your hand or your gun up like this. That is a support way. But again, if you're just trying to be more kind of protective, you can kind of just drop your muzzle here. So if you do need to quickly engage, you at least have some point shooting you can do before actually punching the weapon back up, however you want to do it. But yeah, some ways to just drop it, pull security with your hand out, or just drop it and pull security with the muzzle sort of closer to the shield itself. And again, I'm not going to go too crazy into the tactics itself because yeah, working with a shield is very, very situationally dependent, but also really just dependent on the person itself and kind of what you can do with the shield. Because yeah, it is a doozy. it definitely does require some training to get used to it and see what works for you. But yeah, I guess those are just some things to think about. But it's really kind of hard to look really good and be super effective with a shield. You can get pretty good, almost as good as kind of shooting normally, you know, with one hand. But again, this thing is definitely a bit of a crutch when it comes to general marksmanship and effectiveness with a firearm. But you can train to a point where it's kind of like negligible. But yeah, thank you for watching until this far in the video. I'm kind of at the point where I'm getting a bit of a pump, which is kind of nice, I guess. But yeah, after this, I'm going to have some clips of me actually shooting with this thing, which is, yeah, it's gonna be pretty fun testing it out on the range, doing some live fire and breaking the rust because, yeah, I don't know. Again, I do have a little bit of kind of Stockholm syndrome when it comes to shields. It really is like a love-hate relationship, but they are just so cool and so badass. And they just look, again, they just look super cool. But yeah, stay tuned if you guys want to check out those clips. But if not, thank you for watching. Hopefully, yeah, if you were kind of on the fence as to what you could use this thing for, hopefully the clips and some of the explanations will help. But yeah, it is a very versatile sort of package. And again, having those 3 sizes is great based off of how much protection you want to have, how much mobility you want to have, the certain circumstances you want to use it for. You might want to get the smaller version if you're, you know, having inside your vehicle, and you might want to maybe get one of the larger ones if you're either trying to protect other people, or maybe the medium works fine, especially for like home defense. I think for home defense, the medium is definitely where it's at, and the small could be pretty effective at that as well. But hey, if you want to go big or go home, I guess, with the large, you can be pretty effective with that too, and you're definitely gonna have a pretty good amount of protection inside your house. RTS Tactical, again, thank you for supplying me with the badass shield. Hopefully I can take some cool clips for you. But yeah, that's it for this video. I'll see you all in the next one.